Welcome back. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma. We begin with some breaking news coming in. There has been a massive explosion at the Kabul airport. A Reuters report suggests that at least 13 people have been killed in the attack. Reports say that an ISIS suicide bomber was behind the attack. US troops have also been wounded in the blast, and several reports also suggest that there were 2 blasts. The airport gates were the biggest potential target, given that hundreds of Afghans were present near the gates of the airport. This news comes as many countries have already ended their evacuation efforts due to the ongoing threats. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has confirmed that the evacuations will continue till August 31st. Earlier, several countries urged people to avoid the airport where there was a threat of a suicide bombing. But just days or even hours for some nations before the evacuation effort ends, few appeared to heed the call. The US Embassy warned citizens at 3 airport gates to leave immediately due to an unspecified security threat. Australia, Britain and New Zealand also advised their citizens not to go to the airport, with Australia's foreign minister saying that there was a very high threat of a terrorist attack. Right, now joining us with more details is our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thanks so much for joining us. My first question for you, now many Indians, as we know, have been stuck at the Kabul airport. Is there any update on their evacuations in the wake of this blast?
Well, there is a confirmation that number of Afghan Sikhs and Hindus who were to be evacuated, they are safe as of now. Earlier today, there was this all-party meeting in which the Indian External Affairs Minister said the biggest priority for India is evacuation of Indian nationals, and a substantial number of Indians have been evacuated. A very small number of Indians are still in Afghanistan. He, of course, did not give the details about the number of these Indians and also the location of these Indians, but he said that the number one priority of the Indian government is evacuation of these Indian nationals, and India is committed on that. But largely, if you look at the biggest issue now of the blast, in the aftermath of the blast, is that it will increase the complexities of the entire evacuation process, especially for India. Remember, during that a 3.5-hour long meeting where the Indian External Affairs Minister briefed the MPs, leaders, the floor leaders of almost 30 parties had participated in that all-party meeting. The number one thing, the focus of the Indian External Affairs Minister was the evacuation process and the challenges. He talked about the challenges in terms of taking number of clearances in the regional with the regional countries and the coordination with the regional countries. India is coordinating with the US, with Tajikistan, with the Iranians, and remember the Indian Air Force planes under Operation Devi Shakti have done almost 6 sorties so far for the evacuation, and they can't fly over the Pakistani airspace for obvious reasons, so they have to take a longer route to the Iranian airspace. And Kabul airport is a small airport, so they can't even park the plane there. They have to park at the Aili airbase in Tajikistan. So number of complexities were also talked about during that briefing. But nonetheless, the blast which has happened a short while ago is only going to increase the complexity. The only silver lining to it is that India has been able to evacuate a large number of Indian nationals. The only worry for India is the number of the minority Afghan Sikhs and Hindus who wanted to come to India but were stopped by Taliban. And now with this blast, the entire process is only going to become much more complex.
Right, Siddhant, as you mentioned, India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar had recently said that evacuation remains the top priority for the Indian government. Now, in the light of this attack, this blast, how do we expect the evacuation process to be delayed ahead of the deadline of August 31st?
Well, there is a team as well, an Indian team at the airport, and that is coordinating with various countries, especially on the ground at the Kabul airport. But nonetheless, till the last Indian is there in Afghanistan, the Indian government is going to do its best to bring them back. In fact, the only thing that the problem came in terms of many Indians not heeding to the advice of the Indian government. Remember, the Indian mission in Kabul had issued number of advisories asking the Indian nationals to leave the country to the last commercial plane that is leaving the country. Many of them chose to stay, and that led to the complexities in terms of Kabul falling to Taliban. And then, of course, there was a mad rush for many people wanting to leave the country. Many vulnerable sections of the Afghan society also keen to leave the country. Many want to come to India as well. For that, India has issued a new system of e-visa for many Afghans. But the biggest issue is, how do they leave the country? The only way they can leave the country is to the Kabul International Airport, and that is a scene of devastation. We have seen heartbreaking visuals, and with this blast coming, something the American embassy in Kabul had warned about. The things are only going to become more complex on the ground. The focus, of course, is to make sure that normalcy returns, but it looks like it is highly unlikely for next few weeks any kind of semblance returning on the ground in Kabul, particularly with Taliban saying that Americans need to leave as soon as possible. And indeed, the Americans are also in rush to leave the country.
Right, Siddhant. Now, India has time and again raised the issue of Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for terrorists. Now, in the light of this attack, how do we expect the Indian strategy towards Afghanistan to change?
Well, as of now, nobody has claimed the responsibility of the attack. The Pentagon has only confirmed the fact that the attack has taken place. But when it comes to the issue of terrorism, safe havens in Afghanistan, India has been raising this issue. In fact, just earlier this week, there were two important developments which took place. The BRICS NSA meeting and, of course, the Indian envoy to UN in Geneva talking about Pakistan-based international terror groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed using Afghan territory under Taliban rule to increase security challenges for India.
Right. Now, Siddhant, this attack obviously comes right after there were warnings raised by several Western nations about potential massive security attacks near the Kabul airport. Do we understand, do we have any clarity about how the situation will unfold in the coming days with respect to evacuations that are currently ongoing?
Well, the situation is in flux right now. Nobody knows what's exactly happening. Nobody's in control of the situation. So it is highly unlikely that any semblance will be reached in next few weeks or days. But in terms of the blast having impact on evacuation, it's only going to increase the complexities on the ground, particularly many Afghans, many foreign nationals who want to enter inside the Kabul airport. And now, of course, the gates, the opening of the gates will be much more restricted as well. But in terms of the terror attack, this is the first terror attack, suicide blast taking place in Afghanistan in the aftermath of Taliban entering the national capital Kabul on 15th of August. And of course, this is something that was being warned by the Western governments, Western intelligence agencies. Now, of course, for India, the stakes are high in terms of the geographical proximity of Afghanistan to India, and there can be, of course, increased security challenges. Interestingly, yesterday, India's CDS Bipin Rawat, speaking at an event, talked about how there can be an outflow of terrorism from Afghanistan to India, and for that India is ready to deal with any kind of contingency arising out of that development. But India is coordinating with its partners as well. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin had a conversation earlier this week in which both countries have decided to form a permanent channel for communication and for consultation on the developing situation in Afghanistan.
Right, Siddhant, thank you for those inputs. Joining us now from Afghanistan is our correspondent Anas Malik. Anas, what is the recent update that you have for us on the situation in Kabul as of now?
Well, there were two explosions that have taken place. First being at the Abbey Gate, second being at the Baron Hotel Gate. The Abbey Gate is fully manned by the US side, whereas the Baron Hotel Gate is manned by US and NATO allies as well. I was at the Baron Gate earlier today, and I was at the Abbey Gate just yesterday. There are thousands of people who were there when I was there as well, and I've been seeing people sleeping there, eating there, waiting in desperation, in hope that they would be able to safely make it out to inside the premises of the airbase, so that they can be to safety as what they believe. The first explosion was eyewitnesses tell me, I'm very near to the report, and the eyewitnesses tell me that that it was a suicide attack. The city or the nature of the second explosion is still unclear. Very near to the airport, we're seeing beefed up security measures, extreme beefed up security measures that has been undertaken by the Taliban as well, because both the sites where the explosions took place, the outer area to that was pretty much in control of the Taliban themselves. I'm very near to the airport, and we're seeing that now there are increased checkpoints by the Taliban. They're not letting people go through. Even as the press, they're not letting the press go through. At least 15 people are said to have been injured, whereas 13 people are said to have been killed in these two explosions. Priyanka?
Right, Anas, we in fact have a statement coming from the Pentagon from John Kirby, who says that we can confirm that the explosion at the Abbey Gate was the result of a complex attack that resulted in a number of US and civilian casualties. We can also confirm at least one other explosion at or near the Barron Hotel, a short distance from Abbey Gate. We will continue to update. That's what the Pentagon says. Anas, can you describe the situation in Kabul on ground as of now? Has security been beefed up? Is the capital on high alert?
Well, the capital is not on high alert per se, but yes, the security has been beefed up around the Barron Hotel and around the East Gate, around the Abbey Gate. Three main gates where the U.S. has been at guard. That is the North Gate, that is the Abbey Gate, and that is the Barron Gate as well. I was at the Barron Gate earlier today. I'm very near, as we speak, to the Abbey Gate. There is increased security. Nothing close to what I had witnessed yesterday when I was here. But now there are increased security measures being undertaken by the Taliban in order to prevent people from going near to the explosion sites. Priyanka?
Right, Anas, is there any update on the casualties so far?
The update is that there are at least 15 people who are injured and 13 people who are killed. 13 people who are killed in the attack. That has taken place. So, as we speak, there are measures that are being undertaken. I can see ambulances going. I can see ambulances moving, rushing towards the Abbey Gate of the facility site. Very near to where I am. It's about roughly a kilometer or two away from where I am. And I can explain the situation more details.
Right, Anas, what about the situation near the airport as of now? Are Afghans still crowding the airport in an attempt to flee the country?
The number of people who have been here has drastically reduced. There are people who are here, not that they are not here, but the number of people has drastically reduced around the airport. And but yes, there are people who are still here and waiting in their position. But the crowds that were in thousands in the afternoon and days that we have seen of our reportage, that has cut down by at least 1/10. So if there were, let's say, 10,000 people outside, right now the number is around 1,000 or probably even lesser. Just some families who've been coming from across Kabul, from different areas of Kabul. They have been staying here. They've been moving from across the areas that they were earlier, that was very near to the airport.
Right. Now, Anas, a Reuters report suggests that at least 13 people have been killed in the attack, and reports say that an ISIS suicide bomber was behind the attack. Is there any confirmation on this?
Well, the first explosion was indeed a suicide explosion, and then the second explosion, the nature of the second explosion is still unclear. I am very near to the airport. I can hear jets flying in and flying out near to the Kabul airport, near to the explosion site, and I can see these ambulances moving as well.
Right, now joining us now is Siddhant Sibil, our principal diplomatic correspondent. Siddhant, thanks for staying with us. Now, the Pentagon has confirmed that there was an explosion near a gate. Do we expect a change in the US strategy towards Afghanistan with respect to evacuations after this suicide blast?
Well, I do not expect an overnight change in the policy, but the intent is to leave as soon as possible from Afghanistan, and their basic priority is the evacuation of the American nationals and other nationals as well. Any foreign nationality, it looks like, is also the focus area. But this is something that was, in a sense, expected. There were multiple warnings, and finally, in a sense, that this devastating thing has happened, and that has heightened worries for the regional capitals as well as global capitals. There are meetings as well. In fact, in London, the UK Prime Minister is expected to hold an emergency meeting as well. We are expecting Pentagon to issue more detailed statements as well. The Russians have issued information on the number of casualties. It looks like the developments of last 1 to 2 hours is only going to increase the concerns regarding Afghanistan over fallout of the situation from Afghanistan. In fact, we know that when it comes to India speaking to its partners, not only the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin had a conversation, but the Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke to his American counterpart multiple times, with his British counterpart as well, with the French foreign minister. He's having other communication as well. In fact, he made a stopover as well while coming from New York to India. He made a stopover in Qatar and had conversation with the Qatari counterpart. The Qataris are helping India a lot in terms of the evacuation process, and the Qataris, of course, hold sway when it comes to what's happening in Afghanistan as well, given they have hosted a number of talks, and of course the infamous pact between the Americans and the Taliban was signed in Doha as well. So the role of Doha is something that will be written in a big way in terms of whenever the history of the current times is written on Afghanistan. But nonetheless, when it comes to the entire development, this is a development that is giving a very strong geopolitical shock to the world, and this is going to completely change the power balance in the world as well. This looks like one of those moments in history when the West is facing an existential crisis in terms of they being the benchmark standard for various types of governance, particularly when it comes to democratic functioning or democracy as a way of governance. It looks like an end of the Washington consensus and emergence of the Beijing consensus.
Right. Now, Siddhant, the Taliban had earlier blocked some Sikhs who wanted to leave Kabul. Do you have any update on their evacuations?
Well, it looks like they could be in for a long haul, given the fact that how the Taliban had stopped them yesterday. Yesterday, the flight was ready, and indeed in that flight today, we know Indians came back, Nepalese nationals came back, but these Afghans could not come back because Taliban had stopped them. And this coming in the backdrop of Zabiullah Mujahid's press conference in Kabul, in which he clearly said that Afghans won't be allowed to leave the country. So it looks like with this explosion coming at the Kabul airport, the complexity is only going to increase in terms of evacuation of these Afghan, Sikh and Hindu minorities who wanted to come to India in a way so that they can find a refuge. They obviously see India as a second home. We know that the two MPs, both Anarkali Honariyar and Narendra Singh Khalsa, they spoke to WION first, and they talked about how they have been longing for their country, but they also talked about the role of the Indian government, how India, in a sense, had been helping them in terms of providing them refuge now, and also in terms of now India looks like to be their home for a long time, given it's very difficult for them to go back, and they fear that they being minorities will face the problems.
Right. Now, Siddhant, we actually have some comments coming from the French President Emmanuel Macron, who has said that France will try to evacuate several hundred more Afghans from Kabul. Now, remember earlier, France had said that it will end evacuations on Friday. Now, after this, do we expect other European countries also to expand their evacuations to include more Afghans?
Evacuation process, because Poland has formally closed their evacuation process. The Canadians are also in the line. So it looks like many European countries won't be having the appetite for the evacuation process in Afghanistan now, given that they were already not very optimistic of the situation on the ground, and these blasts happening, they are unlikely to put their forces or their men on the ground, and obviously this will be a negative news for them. So they won't be very keen for any kind of further extension in the evacuation process. But in terms of what I can talk about New Delhi, New Delhi has two major concerns. One, of course, is the evacuation process, particularly of the Indian nationals. Very few Indian nationals, but as I have been saying, that as long as there's an Indian there in Afghanistan, India will be making sure that he or she is evacuated safely and brought back to India. And other, of course, is the political development, India's interest, India's role. We have been the closest partner of the former Afghan government. We have been providing them infrastructure projects, capacity buildings. In fact, the last envoy, the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Hanif Atmar, met was the Indian envoy. And in fact, if you look at the websites of the Afghan foreign ministry, the Afghan presidency, the interior ministry, the defense ministry, it looks like time has stopped for them. There hasn't been any updates since 15th of August for obvious reasons now, but it shows as well the situation on the ground. In fact, if anybody wants to go to Afghanistan, it will be almost impossible now, given the fact that there is no foreign ministry.
Right, Siddhant, thank you for those updates. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Nina Maria Potts, WION's correspondent. Nina, thanks for joining us. Now, the Pentagon has confirmed that there have been U.S. casualties reported in this blast in Kabul. What more can you tell us?
Well, what I can tell you is that we're facing a very dangerous and fluid situation on the ground. We know the reports are saying that at least 13 people have been killed, including children. All U.S. diplomatic personnel in Kabul have been safely accounted for. That's according to reports on ABC News, reporting that 100% accountability of U.S. Chief of Mission personnel. That does not include U.S. troops. And there were U.S. troops casualties among the dead. Videos on the ground suggest that those numbers, those 13 dead, it's likely to be much higher than that. U.S. President Joe Biden is being briefed. He's in the Situation Room with his chief commanding officers. The State Department Operations Center issued an alert to staff stating that initial reports suggest that 4 or more U.S. service personnel may have been injured or killed in the explosion, which happened shortly before 6:30 local time. The main explosion believed to have been a suicide vest attack. Again, we are getting conflicting reports still, but there are suggestions that these two explosions followed standard terrorist strategy, one bomb to divert attention and another one to kill and maim as many people in large numbers. Our first opportunity to hear from President Joe Biden will be probably just 10 minutes from now, although he has been delayed. He's meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister here in Washington, D.C., and that will be our first opportunity to hear from him. But as we stand it, he is still in the Situation Room.
Right. Now, Nina, as you just mentioned, President Biden is being briefed at the White House. Now, the deadline of August 31st is fast approaching. Given these recent explosions, do we see a change in strategy or an extension or change in that deadline from the U.S. side?
Well, it's a very good question what this means for the evacuation process. So far, the U.S. is denying reports that it plans to wrap up its evacuations within 36 hours from now. It's saying that that is not the case. However, Western allies are clearly racing against the clock to get their people out. France has said that it is wrapping up evacuations today. Clearly, this has caused a huge question over whether or not those stop. We do know that a plane took off after the explosion, the first explosion. Certainly Germany has said that they are ending evacuations by Friday, but so far from the US, what we know is that they're denying reports that they're planning to stop evacuations ahead of time. But clearly the situation is, as I say, extremely fluid. And on the ground in Kabul at the airport, we've had eyewitness accounts saying that it was like doomsday. Reports saying that one of the bombs detonated inside a sewage pipe, and there are people dead literally in the sewage canal. So a really horrific situation.
Right. Now, Nina, we actually have an alert coming in where French President Macron has said and in fact warned that the next hours will be extremely risky in Kabul. Now, can you comment on that?
Well, the French president has been in an interesting situation. The French universally have been credited with having been far more organized about their evacuation process than the US. The French allegedly started evacuating people much, much earlier.
Right. Nina, thank you so much for joining us on WION with all the latest updates. And with that, it's now time to take a quick break. Global news and all updates from Afghanistan continue on the other side. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.